Well, my next guest is a former Australian Federal Police and Australian Border officer with extensive experience tackling organised crime, particularly in the illicit tobacco and vaping markets. He founded and led the ABF's tobacco strike team and has spent decades investigating black market tobacco operations, uncovering the networks and criminal groups that profit from the trade. Today, Rohan Pike works as a consultant on illicit trade and tobacco policy, providing expert advice on how governments can reduce the impact of illicit products on public health and revenue. He's currently in the country meeting with MPs and officials to share his insights and warns about the growing illicit tobacco scene, and it is a pleasure to welcome him onto the show. Rohan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Leah.
Lovely to see you and to talk to you. I talked about your background there, and I hope I kind of got a lot of it. But before we get into the conversation, what got you interested, particularly in trying to tackle the illicit tobacco and vaping markets?
As you said, I was in the federal police. I did 25 years there. I did a couple of tobacco-related jobs, and that opened my eyes to the size of the market, which was had been underestimated and really not reported at all. And when I moved to the ABF, I decided to just tackle tobacco solely and focus on that. And it was as a result of that dedicated team looking at tobacco only that really uncovered the size of it. So that pricked my interest. I had a bent in fraud investigations, trying to protect the Commonwealth's revenue, which obviously was significant in illegal tobacco circles. And since then, I've just kept an interest in it, and it's really been a hobby up until the last couple of years, where I've got more serious because of the massive crime wave that it's caused in Australia, which I had predicted, and now it's come to fruition, and people have been looking around for a person who could speak to it, and some of that responsibility's fallen on me.
So tell us about Australia. You argue that extremely high excise taxes makes legal cigarettes very expensive, which fuels the demand for cheap illicit alternatives. So, because it's the same here in New Zealand, very, very expensive. So what do you want to do then? How do you counteract that?
I know it's controversial, but the excise has clearly gone too high in Australia and perhaps in New Zealand as well. In Australia, the illicit product can be bought for $10, whereas the legal products are about $50. So that differential of 5 to 1 is the primary driver of the illegal market. And we're talking about billions of dollars here of product that is flowing in. In New Zealand, the differential is not quite so high. It's closer to 2 to 1, which is still significant, and it's growing. But once it gets to 4 or 5 to 1, then it's really a no-brainer for consumers to head towards the cheaper product.
Is it correct you've suggested that you want to reduce the price of legal tobacco or the excise?
Yes, that's one of the measures. Clearly, if the excise stays as it is and the price of tobacco stays as it is, then the criminals will meet the demand for the market. They will be able to bypass border controls and domestic law enforcement agencies. That's just been the way for hundreds of years. When there's a prohibition type market, the criminals will meet the demand. And the only way to rebalance that market is to lower the price. There are other ways to do it. New Zealand obviously is one of the best examples of how you've embraced safer nicotine products. And of course, every country in the world that has significantly reduced their smoking rates has done so by doing that. So you are a world leader in that, and Australia does the opposite. We are banning all nicotine products virtually. We do have a process, a very elongated and complicated process to get hands on vapes. But most people don't bother to go through that process. They just go to the illicit shop, of which there are thousands.
Sorry, Rohan, if they were to bring down, say, the cost of legal tobacco, say in Australia, we want people to stop smoking. So is that kind of, you know, see the double-edged sword here?
Yeah, but at the moment, the excise is going up to an extreme level, and the
Mm,
smoking rates are actually going up. So,
yeah.
and they're going up because there's a $10 alternative that are everywhere, omnipresent. So, kids, youngsters, older people, they are now becoming more attracted to cigarettes because you can get them for 1990 prices.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Yeah.
Prices we haven't seen since last century. So that defeats the argument about lowering the price. I'm talking about returning consumers to a legal market as opposed to illegal market. So at the moment, our policies are encouraging the criminal market at the expense of a legal market. And it's not outrageous to say that in Australia, within a year, perhaps 18 months, there'll be virtually no legal market of cigarettes.
Wow. Wow. Geez,
So
that
that's
is
not to say
amazing.
there'll be no smoke. That's not to say there'll be no smokers. There's just
No,
as many
but
smokers as in fact that number is increasing,
yeah.
um, but
But
they're just smoking the illegal product.
so can you talk to us about the scale of Australia's illicit tobacco market and how it's changed in recent years? Because I looked up obviously what, you talk about. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars, and it's run by the criminal organisations, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the illicit size of the illicit market is obviously difficult to estimate, but recent studies by the government, in fact, have forecast it to be about $8 billion worth.
Jeez.
Um, when I was in the ABF, I used to tell the government, I tried to tell the government that the illicit rate was at 20% and that was a
Mm,
concern. And they need to implement strategies and upgrade their enforcement to counter that. That didn't happen. So about 5 years ago, that rate had increased to about 30%. And in the last 5 years, it's ballooned to about 70% of the market. And as I
wow.
say, in another year, I mean, on the current trajectory, the legal market could well be extinct within a year or two. Um,
Jeez.
just on government revenue, 5 years ago we received $16.5 billion. Last year we received $7 billion. So there's $10 billion in revenue the government's not receiving a year,
Yeah. Wow. Phew. What
as an
about
example.
what we haven't spoken about the law enforcement strategies to deter illicit trade. I mean, how obviously it's not even effective in Australia. What are they doing?
No, well, not nearly enough. So this is obviously coming from an enforcement background. I tried to encourage the government many moons ago that to upgrade their enforcement, both
Mm,
at the border, offshore, internationally, stopping it coming to the border, and also post border. You must assume that some will get through the border. We virtually had no domestic enforcement uh, regime whatsoever until about the last year. And now every state is scrambling to get some sort of licensing scheme or fining regime in place because they've been significantly late to the party. And had that been implemented 10 years ago, then it may have had some effect in stemming the flow.
yeah.
Um, but now that it's so entrenched, so widespread, and such a large market that I'm losing faith rapidly in the ability of
Mm.
enforcement only to reduce the size of the market or even slow it down.
Well, something you just said then, it has now spread so wide. I was going to ask, are there any particular regions or communities in Australia that where illicit tobacco is more prevalent?
Oh, not really. It's right across the country now. It's
Yeah.
obviously it's a Commonwealth measure, being the policies that are driving it with the excise and so on. Melbourne has seemed to be a hotspot for the violence initially, but now that
Mm.
violence has spread right across the country. So even yesterday there was a firebombing in Perth, and there have been fire bombings in every state and territory in Australia now. So that's the other issue that's raised its head in the last couple of years is the fighting between organised crime groups for the market share.
Wow.
And to do that, it's been becoming increasingly violent.
So what about we haven't spoken yet about vaping, because how do you view the relationship between illicit tobacco and vaping regulations? Should both be addressed together?
Certainly in Australia, vaping, as I said, you can get your hands on a regulated vape, but it's an extremely complex process. So much so that over 95% of the vaping market in Australia is unregulated. So it's illicit. They're sold out of the same stores as the illicit tobacco. So right next door to each other. Obviously, the problem with illicit vapes is you don't know what's in them, and that's causes a massive health concern. In New Zealand, you took the sensible measure of regulating your vape market. It's a very small illicit vape market here, and it's a credit to you. And the embrace of the vapes and the education around how much safer they are and less risky has been the primary factor in you reducing your smoking rates to a very commendable 6.8%.
Although we now do struggle with young children vaping, kids vaping now. Has run away on us. So there is an issue there.
Yeah, no, certainly the youth vaping has caused much outcry. However, only 5% of the vaping market is teenagers. So there's 95% of the vaping market are adults. And, according to all the global studies and the science and National Health Service of the UK and others, vapes are 20 times safer. So that should be taken into perspective when we're talking about the concern over vaping. Whereas your youth smoking market, which is the main game when it comes to cancer and death, is almost extinct. So you have a 15 to 17-year-olds at 0.6%, which is next to nothing. And that's been a great result for you.
One of my listeners has texted Rohan and asked, are you able to ask Rohan to clarify, are these cigarettes smuggled into Australia or stolen cigarettes already in the country? And if smuggled, how do you smuggle ciggies in? Good question, really. I didn't ask it where they're coming from.
Yeah, no, they're definitely, most of them are smuggled in. There is the value of cigarettes in Australia is so extreme now. A packet of Marlboros, for example, is about $68, which is an extraordinary amount. And that has caused robberies and violence in legitimate wholesalers. So kids are coming in, stealing hundreds of packs, selling them back to organised crime groups for $5 a pack. So that's just an encouragement for them. And in fact, I was at a conference last week where I had to tell retailers that it was in their best interest not to sell cigarettes due to the safety concerns. So that was it's an extraordinary admission that's where we've come to. But no, 90% of the goods are smuggled in. They're smuggled in containers in sea freight. Criminals bombard the border. They come up with various ways to deceive the border authorities. One container can contain 10 million cigarettes. And they make a profit. It costs them $250,000 to fill that container, and they make $10 million in profit out of it. So that's 40 to 1. They don't care if a couple of containers get caught on the way through. That's just a business expense. But if they just use a scattergun approach at the border, then they're certainly going to get most of their product through.
Well, we had that issue here about a year or so ago, Rohan, with kids, smashing into ram raiding dairies and gas stations and offies and that, and cigarettes. They were stealing to order for the gangs, and there was a conversation about should dairy owners and shop owners not sell cigarettes. And in Australia they probably do the same. They kind of lock them away, so you're not supposed to see them, but the kids know they were there. But I think most of our dairy owners will still sell cigarettes. I mean, the ram raids have dropped down, got new government in, but I still think I sometimes question why you'd want to sell them because, I don't smoke. I've never smoked, but I know cigarettes are up there like yours. A packet's well over $50. So I suppose it's up to the individual whether they sell them or not.
Yeah, well, retailers have to work out, their priorities. Obviously, cigarettes have been a significant part of their profits over the years, and it would be very difficult to give give that up. But if insurance doubles, triples, or quadruples as it has in Australia, if the violence continues, if they have to spend extra money on security, and they're just taking into the health and safety of their staff and themselves. Australia, the violence is so extreme that they are, about to make the decision on a mass scale to stop selling cigarettes, and then it'll only be in perhaps the larger supermarkets and so on.
Right.
But that's where we've got to. You're probably not quite at that position yet in New Zealand.
Actually, I want to go to that now. So you are here in New Zealand. I know you've met with some MPs and officials. You want to share your insights and warn about what we're talking about, the growing illicit tobacco scene. Just last week, you might have seen this already, or the MPs might have told you met. Two men were arrested in Auckland after customs and police seized 1.5 million illegal cigarettes. And 500,000 in cash across 5 storage facilities. So what was the feedback so far you have had when you've had these discussions with officials in New Zealand?
It's easy to be distracted by seizures and arrests.
Oh, right.
The seizures can be seen as a sign of success of the customs agencies, and indeed it's one of their core responsibilities to search for and seize illicit goods. But it's also a sign of the amount of products that's coming in. So in no way would anyone suggest that they're stopping 100% of it. And I think you'll find perhaps in an increasing illicit market that there'll be more seizures and more arrests and so on. And it's whether the penalties for those are sufficient to deter others to come who might be thinking about coming into the illicit market, or whether they're not. I saw one person went to jail for 2 years. Another person got a community correction order just a couple of weeks ago here in New Zealand. So community correction orders are probably not sufficient to deter organised crime individuals away from making millions of dollars from each and every shipment. So you probably, one of the things I'm suggesting over here to politicians and anyone else I can speak to, police and customs, is to realign those penalties with the changing crime environment. So tobacco produces more criminal money in Australia than all of the other illicit products combined. So that's where we've got to in Australia. And you can go to jail for 25 years for a ton of cocaine, but you'd be lucky to go to jail at all for anything to do with tobacco. So the penalties are not quite aligned at the moment with the damage that these goods are causing.
Well, that's a good call. Welcome to New Zealand. If we don't develop strategies, Rohan, to combat what we've been talking about, do you think you would see us on the scale as seen in Australia?
I don't see why you wouldn't go down the same path. You have organised crime groups already. Our organised crime groups who were perhaps involved in drugs and so on are now diversified in Australia to tobacco. You may well see that the same thing happens in New Zealand when they realise how much profit they can make. Obviously, there are Australians who have been deported from Australia to New Zealand. They will perhaps come with that knowledge of the profitability of tobacco. And it's not very far to get to New Zealand. Yeah. So a ship containing container of tobacco can come to Auckland just as easily as they can to Sydney. And as I say, the main driver being the differential between legal and illegal is starting to creep up. So once you say $40 or $50 legal, your illegal cost might be around $18. If that creeps up to 3 or 4 times, then that will be an incentive for criminals to pour in. I do note that the latest report had the illicit rate here at 27%. So that's gone up from 21 to 24 to 27 in the
Oh,
last 3 years. And as I say, in Australia, it hit a tipping point around 30, where it just fell off the cliff, and now it's
that was it.
70.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and you have to wonder whether New Zealand has the infrastructure, the enforcement response in place, ready
Yeah.
for an onslaught like that. I'm not sure that you have. I do note that your ministerial advisory group on transitional and organised crime did
Oh,
report
yes.
and
Yep.
did include tobacco in their final report as one of the priorities. So that's encouraging. And if their recommendations are implemented, then you'll be in a better spot.
Is that, have you met with Sonny Korshall or from the ministry or the one you
Not
just
as yet,
mentioned?
no.
Okay.
Not as yet, no.
It's
But I've been trying to reach out to anyone I
as many
can
as you can.
to alert them.
Yeah.
But not only am I providing lessons on the disaster that is Australia's tobacco
Yeah.
policy, I'm also here to learn lessons on some of the good things that you're doing. So, you shouldn't forget that New Zealand's a world leader in tobacco control,
Okay.
as your delegation pointed out last week at the World Health Organization, and you should be proud of that, and that's great. And I would like to run around the world telling people not only what not to do in relation to Australia, but what you should do in relation to
Yes.
New Zealand. It'd be great to have a good example.
And before I let you go, Rohan, so there's, from what I've gathered from our conversation, is you would like to see, not just in Australia but for New Zealand, it's going to be, there's no silver bullet, but we need better customs, border protections. We need stronger laws so that those that are caught just don't get a slap on the hand with a wet bus ticket. And of course, and would you also like to see what you said in Australia, to see the excise tax or the cost come down here?
I think it should be reviewed. Certainly between 2010 and 2020, you increased your excise 10% every
That's
year
right.
by
Yep.
10 years. I'm not sure that there was any science behind that. It was just seemed like a nice round figure that you increased it by. And at some point, someone hopefully might have said, have we taken this too far? So, as I say, once you get to 3 times the illegal price, then that differential just encourages criminals. So perhaps it should be reviewed on the back of what's happened in Australia.
Yes.
But the main difference between our countries is that you have embraced vapes and safer nicotine products, whereas we haven't. That's the key driver in reducing your rates, and you shouldn't go squeamish on it. You should be telling everyone how much safer and less risky they are to get people off smoke. So you've done a great job so far, but you probably can go a bit harder on that as well.
Look, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Nice to speak with you, and appreciate. How long are you in New Zealand for?
All week. So I'm sending out emails and trying to meet as many people as I can, but and get
Nice.
around the country a bit. But it's not very far to Melbourne. It's only a 3-hour trip, and I didn't catch Jetstar. I did caught it.
So I was going to ask you.
I did
Who
come
did you
over
fly?
on. I flew with Qantas, but I think they've just seduced me with their frequent flyer program. But
No, good on you.
it sort of blinds me to that airline. But as you said in that previous conversation, once you change, it might take a long time to go back. And I think we might see the same with the tobacco market. People are now changing to a $10 product. Why would you go back to a $40 product? So
Exactly.
once that happens, it's hard to get them off it.
Well, actually, I've had some of my listeners come through, Ryan, while we were talking. And, it's happening here, of course. Leah, I used to buy legal cigs when I was still smoking. Normal cigarettes were $45. I was paying $15 for black market ones. It's really common on building sites.
Yeah, I believe
Yeah.
it's common at the university as well. But
Ah,
one of the one of the difficulties New Zealand has with lowering the smoking rate from 6.8, which it has been now for 2 years, is your significant immigration policy. So when you can change the numbers with only a couple of thousand people, but then import tens of thousands of people who come from high smoking countries
Countries.
that
Yeah.
can really skew the figures,
Yeah.
and they also like smoking the product that they smoked at home, and they also like smoking at the price that they used to smoke it at home, and so that
Yes.
might tend to encourage the illicit market as well. So that's
Good
some things
point.
to think about.
Good point. Rohan Pike, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.